Hi, parents and families. I'm sad to not get to see you tonight at an in-person back to school night, but glad that we're trying to be as safe as we can here at West. Just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the U.S. Humanities course that your student is taking with me. So I think it's important maybe since this is not just English 9 or English 10 to kind of figure out what is humanities. So I love teaching humanities because it's sort of a history or historical context class. And it's also sort of a cultural anthropology and sociology class. And in some days and some units, it really feels like it's a media studies class. But ultimately, it falls within the English department, and I'm an English teacher. So what this means is that in various times, we're going to be reading a lot of literature, even classic literature, poetry, doing a lot of annotation, reading whole novels. We're also reading essays. We're also reading current events. We're also listening to film and music, or listening to music and watching film and TV and talking about how each of these texts are artifacts that are a product of their era, which gets us into that sort of cultural anthropology and sociology and historical context. So that's sort of the sort of fusion of all of that is U.S. Humanities in the English department at West. We've started that first unit in fall tri dominant American values. We've talked a lot about culture in the class already. And we've spent some time talking about defining this term zeitgeist, the spirit of the era. So what's the zeitgeist of the generation we're living in? And one of the questions that I'll ask them throughout the course is, what's the zeitgeist of the era that we're studying in that time, those weeks? And that's sort of where you get that cultural anthropology, historical context sorts of stuff too. So we do all the English examination, but with this historical lens in mind. So we're sort of just laying the foundation of that so far this year, looking at advertising a little bit. Right now, we talked a little bit about the culture of their generation and Gen Z last week. So once we sort of wrap up there and do some media literacy stuff, we'll get into a unit that really examines the American dream. Our text list this year is still sort of fluid because we didn't get a lot of books back last year for humanities, and a lot of those students don't go to West. So we're not sure what we have copies of and what we don't have copies of, and we're always in this pursuit of making our content, our novels, our text list more dynamic for students. But some possibilities there would be things like Death of a Salesman, Truman Show, In the Heights, et cetera, et cetera. And then that'll take us into winter tri, where we'll start talking about who's marginalized out of the stream or who's invisible, starting with Ellison's excerpts out of Ellison's Invisible Man, excerpts out of Malcolm X and James Baldwin and MLK, Langston Hughes. And then we'll get into the beat culture, or the beat movement, and this sort of counterculture rebellion, rejection of these dominant American values, pretty much outright rejection of them. And that sets up third tri, where we get into, so the beats we'll talk like Ginsberg poetry, Ginsberg poetry, things like Cuckoo's Nest, maybe some other excerpts here and there. And then third tri, we'll get into a sort of coming of age and look at texts that historically America's coming of age with the coming out of the counterculture, but also individual characters and things like Bell Jar, maybe Slaughterhouse-5, Across the Universe film, maybe more contemporary films like Eighth Grade and Lady Bird, and sort of juxtapose those back to like The Graduate and think about what's it mean to come of age in all these different eras. And then we'll end the year by having students really explore their generation's zeitgeist in sort of independent study of music and current events and TV/film and of course literature. So having said all that, there's a lot of possible texts here that may be considered for mature audiences. We've been really, really intentional and used a lot of discretion in choosing the course material, but there's a lot of powerful films and music and literature that we think, we being the people who teach humanities at West, are vital. They're not extra, they're not frivolous, they're really critical. But I do think that there's some potentially sensitive material there. So we do our best to try to anticipate that. We do our best to preview that for students, but it's impossible to know every possible trigger in a classroom. So should you have concerns or questions about anything that we're working on in units, or if you have a student that you think it would be beneficial for me to know possible triggers so I can better anticipate and better serve them, please don't hesitate to reach out about that. Really quickly, they're grading. There's 3 big chunks here: progress checks, final products, and participation. You can see the weights there: 15 for participation, 40 progress checks, 45 final products. They can redo any of their progress checks. Those are the sort of assignments that build towards a cumulative final thing, whether that's a test or paper or project, whatever. They can also redo that final product. They can't redo the participation. And because they're allowed to redo to improve their grade in a lot of places, I'm not offering any extra credit. And these weights are pretty consistent within the department and within the other humanities teachers in the department. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview of the course and gets you some information that might be helpful without overwhelming you. I think I'm probably already up against my time limit. So if you have more questions, please feel free to contact me, boylan.john@iowacitysschools.org. And I look forward to working with all your students this year.